Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. I've been lucky with not encountering Karen up until recently. Honestly, I thought the internet over-exaggerated about these crazy entitled people. I came to the sad truth, these people do exist, and my faith in humanity dropped just a tad more. And just a little more as I'm typing this, coming to the realization these people are raising the next generation. Anyways, I work in the solar industry, mainly residential, as a service technician. Whenever something goes wrong with a solar PV system, I'm the guy they send out to fix it. I've been doing this long enough to have the knowledge and skill to complete an entire installation by myself, with roof pitch and module count, within reason that is. Anyways, I went out with one of the crews for an installation as they were short a few guys. So myself and two of the other technicians I work with volunteered to help them out. Seemed like a pretty standard job, 40 plus panels, not a steep roof. Okay, we should be in and out timing, permitting we're finished and back at the shop by 4 or 5 p.m. So we arrive at the house as what looked to be a pretty rich neighborhood. Homeowner greeted us and even offered to grab us all breakfast. It was a good day so far. So we set up an exclusion zone to prevent anyone from coming too close to the house as equipment, tools, etc. will fall off the roof. I'm on the ground working on building the electrical portion of the system. I've got my music playing all is good. I've got myself in a good rhythm. I then noticed a child, could have been no older than 7, dart past the red tape we'd put up and head toward a ladder to the roof and try to start playing on it. Like a human being with common sense, I ran over and told the kid he couldn't play on this and that. Red tape was up so he couldn't get hurt. And the moment you've all been waiting for, Karen appears. Man, she had it all. The haircut, the sunglasses, and she had the worst spray tan I've personally seen. It's summer. People just go and get some sun. Damn. Karen, don't talk to my son like that. He just wants to play with your tools. Ma'am, I can't allow him to play with our tools. I can't have him or yourself pass that red tape. We put it up for your safety. Karen, oh, he'll be fine. Just tell your workers to not drop anything. Me, who had just lost a couple brain cells from her response. I can tell them to not drop anything all day, but that doesn't exclude the fact accidents happen, and we cannot risk anyone who is a non-worker to be hurt. Now please leave this as an active work site. Karen, I can do as I please and so can my son. We're friends with these people and they let my son play in their yard. You should take a better direction when talking to potential customers, Me, ma'am. Until I have site plans for an installation on your house, how I speak to you is not a concern I have. If I sound cross, I apologize, but I have now told you twice that I cannot have you pass that red tape. So, I am asking once again, please take your son and leave before either of you get hurt. This is an active work site. She grabbed her child's arms and stormed off, while also tearing off a section of the exclusion zone tape and storming over to her house, 2 doors down. I stood by our trailer to take a breather and began chain smoking. I try not to get stressed out so much. Being my job is already stressful as it is, but I have zero patience for people with no common sense, especially if they're a parent. A little while later, panels are prepped, roof is based out for anyone who knows about solar installations. We used a rackless system instead of actual rails. We're now just finishing up the electrical before placing the panels into position. I'm running between the basement and the outside area. I get back to outside, punching in some wires when I hear one of my guys yelling from the roof. Hey, kid, what are you doing? That immediately caught my attention as I thought the little kid had run past the exclusion zone tape once again. But my eyes caught a guy running down the road with a solar panel in tow. He thankfully wasn't very fast without he was holding the panel. I darted over to this kid with one of our solar panels and attempted to rip it from his hands while simultaneously trying not to let it hit the ground. I was able to get my hands on it, but this kid actually put up a fight and tossed the solar panel that put me in an awkward position, and he landed a full-on punch to my chest. Not gonna lie, it did knock the wind out of me a little. But I went into full self-defense mode. The kids wanted to take another shot at me since I didn't completely go down. I immediately put him on the ground without throwing any punches. I didn't know how old this kid was, and I didn't want to get into trouble for hitting a minor, but I wasn't about to let this kid continue to hit me. I'm thankful I have a little background in amateur MMA and a police officer dad and older brother who've taught me stuff over the years. So I had the kid down on the ground, pinned, and out comes Karen running, screaming like a banshee. The typical "I'm calling the cops. And you just assaulted my son." I really asked myself if this was happening. Me. Your son was stealing a solar panel and punched me in the chest. I had to defend myself. Karen. I told him to grab the solar panel. My neighbor said I could take one and try it out and see how I like it. At this point, my guys are at my aid, and I tell them to call the cops and keep Karen away from me. As we wait for the cops to show up, this orange-skinned lunatic is ranting about how she's going to sue all of us and blah, 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 blah. Cops arrived about 10 minutes later. I removed myself from the kid, and the cops split us all up to take our statements and such. Karen went with her story about how her neighbor said she could borrow a solar panel and try it out. Now, even if he did say that, which he didn't, you can't just let someone take a solar panel because they still belong to the company. Most people who buy solar finance the panels and pay them off over the course of the next couple of years. Works a lot like financing a car. It gets to the point where the cops ask if I want to press charges for the assault. The guy whose house we were installing had a security camera system and caught the incident all on tape, so I gladly say yes. No idea when the court proceedings are going to be taking place. I honestly just want this over and done with. My mom died in 2011, right around the time that my paternal Aunt Cookie was left by her husband after beating cancer for a third time. Now, my aunt is very physically changed from all chemo and radiation. She had gained a lot of weight, lost most of her hair, and had aged a bit faster due to a lack of hormones from having every trace of womanhood cut from her body. I have extreme anxiety, stemming from agoraphobia, so my Aunt Cookie was my safe place for the duration of the whole event, which lasted several days. This consisted of everyone being at my parents' summer house in Mexico, basically standing around, chatting, drinking, and eating everything in sight. This funeral had every family member, plus people who were aunts and uncles that I had never met in my life. Not being a drinker and not knowing a lot of the people walking around, my aunt and I sat down to have a cigarette each and catch up on our lives and whatnot. Suddenly, while we're mid-sentence in her cancer update, a Karen that I had never set eyes on in my life starts loudly going off. She swats at the air like our cigarette smoke is even anywhere near her and makes a big fuss. Karen says, "Oh, that's so disgusting. How can you behave in such a disgusting manner at a funeral?" Me. My mom was a smoker, so she'd approve. Karen. She was your mother. She didn't teach her daughter how to be a lady, I see. And you, talking to my aunt. You should know better. What do you have to say for yourself, smoking in front of this child? I was 33. My Aunt Cookie takes off her sad cancer hat and strokes the small tuft of hair she had left in the front and booming her voice, but not yelling, says, for all to hear, "What's gonna do? Give me cancer." Karen looked uncomfortable after the hat came off, but still managed to look insulted and walked away. I could hear the internal here. After a millisecond of silence, I giggle, snorted and laughed until my side hurt. Everyone else in the room just kind of smiled, though I think I heard a few snickers. I asked my aunt, "Who was she?" My aunt said, "I don't know. Some weirdo that probably came for the free food." My aunt rocks. She's been in remission since 2012. Sorry if the wording is a bit strange as I'm recalling everything said and translating it to English. Edit. Thanks for all the love and stories of your own guys. This really is my favorite story to tell about her. I told her years ago that I'd be recounting this at her funeral if she kicks before I do. No Karens will be invited. Plus, she lives in California, so no mooches either. This happened at work today. I work part-time at a popular clothing store in my country. The customers are usually entitled women who come and spend their husband's money and their whole personality is that they are rich. It's a sort of type of women here. They have those huge, plumped-up lips from fillers, often a dead giveaway of how they act. And they're so used to people kissing their butts that whenever someone doesn't, they make a scene. Me and a group of girls were working at the changing rooms, and a procedure we have there is to ask people how many things they are bringing in, and to ask them to press their bag on a sensor to detect if they have something from the store in their bags. This woman with a witchy attitude and the already mentioned huge lips just walks by the station and nonchalantly starts heading for the changing rooms. We've all been sick of entitled people the whole day, so one of the girls shouts out to her and the conversation goes as follows. Girl, excuse me, Mum, how many things do you have on you? EK, come and count them, in a rude tone. Girl, who's already supper annoyed. All right, I will. We are all a little flabbergasted by this already, and a girl starts to follow the woman. A few seconds later, the girl comes back, all rilled up and talks in the walkie. Talkie girl. Can the manager and security guard come to the women's changing rooms right away? We all stare at her, shocked, and ask her what happened. She tells us that she came up to her changing room where the woman had already placed her things in, and as she was about to head in, the woman pushed her and started cursing her out. She told her she would be calling security, and the woman replied she will call the manager. The girl answered that there is no need because she will be calling her. In short, the manager shows up and she tells us that the woman is a friend of the director of the whole store. Mind you, this place is huge and it brings in a lot of money, and that we should let it go as to not cause anyone problems. We were told that whenever she comes, we are supposed to ignore the protocol and just let her pass with no questions asked. How ridiculous. In the end, the girl was told to go take a walk and come back in 15 minutes so the woman will finish and leave. No satisfying resolution, but there was nothing we could have done. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. Alright, this might sound strange at first, but bear with me. I'm a big fan of gaming and often invest in new accessories like keyboards and mice to enhance my gaming experience. I had a keyboard that my cousin loved to use whenever he visited, so when I decided to upgrade, I thought of customizing it for him as a gift. My cousin is a fan of Asian and European cuisines, so I came up with the idea of replacing the keys with small food items. Luckily, a friend of mine works in a shop specializing in customization, and he offered to do the job at a discounted rate since he also enjoyed playing games with my cousin. We teamed up to make it a joint gift. The customization process took about a month and cost around $450. When it was ready, I went to pick it up from the shop and had it wrapped for my cousin's birthday, which was the next day. As I was getting it packed in a transparent plastic box, I noticed a curious 7-year-old kid looking at the keyboard with fascination. I asked him if he liked it and offered to show it to him up close. He seemed particularly interested in the sushi key and even mentioned wanting to try it. I explained that the keys weren't real food, but suggested he could ask my friend to make him a similar one for gaming. The situation took an unexpected turn when the kid's mother misunderstood and thought her son wanted actual sushi from my box. She approached me with an unusual demand, insisting that I couldn't deny her son a piece of sushi from what she thought was a food container. I tried to clarify that it was a keyboard, but she accused me of lying and attempted to forcefully take the box from my hands. In the struggle, the keyboard fell and broke with several pins detached, a large crack, and some parts shattered into pieces. Devastated, I demanded compensation, but the lady dismissed it, claiming she wouldn't have bothered if she knew it was something related to Gene Z. Frustrated, I called the police who reviewed the CCTV footage and took action, leading to her removal. In the midst of this chaos, I also couldn't find the phone skin I wanted as it was out of stock. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake, then male 23, through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move to the opposite side of the United States for grad school, and I had already been making plans to move with friends only a 90-minute drive away from where he was moving to. We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate, both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends with them as well. Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him to hang out on weekends. He was renting a house with 2 roommates, also in his program. We were young, so money was tight, but we had fun, went for taco dates, and spent a lot of time at his house where he was breeding and selling small animals. Jake was an animal sciences PhD student, so being around animals was normal, and I loved it. I met and became friends with his advisor's wife, Mary, female, mid-50s, who worked in administration at the university. She is a lovely woman, and I would often have lunch with her when I went over on weekends. Jake was a teaching assistant, TA, and I met other people in the program and made friends with them faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, laying in bed together in a state of some undress, and he said out of the blue, he was concerned I'd been gaining weight, and it made it harder for him to be attracted to me. No concern about my health. It was all about him finding me unattractive. I sat up and said, well, then maybe you should make sure there's better food for me to eat than crackers and cheese when I come up on weekends. Even at 23, I didn't take that kind of bees. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him 2 years earlier and still wore the same size clothes, about a US size 6'8". I wasn't going to engage in a fight about it after all. It was his problem, not mine, so I asked him calmly, "So what is your solution to this?" He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I guess that you should try to lose weight." And I said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that, so what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Well, I guess nothing. I wanted to let you know how I feel." And I said, "Cool, thank you." Put my clothes back on, went to sleep, and drove home the next day as usual. We keep dating, and about 3 months later, he called me and said he wanted to break up after close to 3 years. The reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about science." He felt like he couldn't have a conversation with me about his work where he didn't have to use common names for animals instead of scientific ones. I said, "Well, that's bullcrap. What's the real reason?" He said it was the real reason. He came to see me a month later to return something of mine, and I confronted him, demanding the real reason. He finally admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students. Let's call her Meg, a 19-year-old. He was then 26 and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave. My roommate threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't go, and he left. It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to stunned laughter. I'd met Meg a few times, and at one point, she was at his house for a BBQ and spilled something all over her pants. Jake asked me if I could loan her some sweats. I couldn't because I was a size 8 and she was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the point is, I realized he made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him because he was a coward. He clearly liked a big Gale. Although when he'd said those things to me about my weight, it was 1 a.m. I lived about 95 miles away and we had just had sex, so I don't know how he thought this would go, even in hindsight. It perplexes me. Did he think I was going to break up with him and storm off into the night and drive for an hour and a half? Anyway, I emailed his roommates. It was the early 2000s. It's how you communicated anything you didn't want to say on the phone. I wanted to let them know we'd broken up and that they were always lovely to me and thanked them for being friends. They both admitted they knew about Meg and were the ones to demand that Jake tell me or they would. That's when he broke up with me with the lame, you don't understand science excuse. One of his roommate, a super nice, super cute guy named George, offered to help me get a few things still at their house that he had collected for me away from around the house. He suggested I come up for the weekend. We go out and drink and have a good time. All the things Jake didn't want to waste money on. And I said, sure. So I went up, and George let me into the house while Jake was gone. I took photos of all of his animals because while I might not be a PhD student, I paid attention and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it. It was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $25 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of an animal not allowed in the state, which was in a tank, right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with George. We stumbled in early, around midnight, so Jake and Meg, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and George practically carrying me. I spent the night in George's room. He was a total gentleman, but made sure to leave the room and parade past them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Jake said I didn't have to act like a whore in front of him as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair while George beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Meg looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said have fun with my leftovers and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud hookup and a few juvenile insults was my revenge. It was not. The next day I had my photos developed, the good old days, and called the state office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the animals in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have at all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Jake wasn't well liked by his peers in his program or by his roommates, but George had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that ATA was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone who they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Meg. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. George and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Jake's entitled BS. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been emailing with him, and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent that to Mary. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she made sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Jake's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later, George called me giddy to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Meg was there when it happened and told the officials, as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Jake and that they were all legal. That put George and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic illegal to have an estate under nearly any circumstances animal. Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate in the house. The animals were all in communal areas, and the officers stayed there for a few hours and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate. George and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Meg apparently couldn't get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find him. Remember, no cell phones yet. It was a good day. The only animals they left was some guppies and a fish tank. Now, PhD students need grant money to do research, and a large part of animal studies funding comes from the federal government. Jake had just gotten an EPA grant right around when he broke up with me. So I called the EPA and asked how I would report that a person with a federal grant would be investigated for illegally harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost his EPA grant and had to make restitution on what had already been used, close to $30,000. He would never be able to get another federal grant. He avoided jail time on the state charges since all the animals were in good health, but lost all his breeding animals, worth thousands of dollars, since they were collected for safekeeping during the investigation when the 2 illegal animals were taken. In the end, he owed a $15,000 fine, and the 2 animals went to a nearby nature center. For years, I would stop by if I was in the area to visit them. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with a student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide the relationship with Meg and was so stupidly self-assured he didn't even wait the 4 weeks until she would have been done with his class to start publicly dating her. By the university rules, he would have been in the clear to date her, not being her teacher anymore, and she would just have to avoid any classes he was ATA in. It never fails to make me laugh. After a few months, I emailed his sisters and told them I missed them because Jake broke up with me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt weird contacting them. The girls told me he told the family I broke up with him because of the distance. I forwarded them emails that Jake wrote after the breakup, talking about how he fell for Meg and he was sorry about it, but it was true. I couldn't keep up with him academically, and it made him attracted to Meg. Jake managed to convince his dad to pay for 1 more year of school so he could get a master's instead of a PhD, and while I stayed in contact with his sisters and brother via email and then social media, I largely let it all go. I got even, made some friends. Mary became like an auntie to me, and I went on with life. I went on to get a master's degree myself and my specialty, helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to laypeople. You know, us dummies who can't remember all the scientific names, I swear, it happened by accident. Not designed, but I love it, and I work with everyone from small-town doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies to museums to state and federal governments to film and TV producers. I travel a lot and speak and get to learn a lot of cool things about our planet and how things work. I knew through his siblings that Jake and Meg got married and had 2 kids. Meg dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant. Jake went back to breeding animals. Every once in a while, his sisters or brother would tell me something over for lunch or via text, but we had our own relationship that exists outside of him. Apparently, when I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, he loudly complained at a co-ed bridal shower that all of his siblings still were my friend and didn't make an effort to embrace his now wife, Meg. Apparently, the sister just laughed and said, "I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers." This is how Jake's parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended, 10 years after we broke up. Jake never found out I was behind reporting him to the state, and in the end, I didn't lie about a single thing. Except maybe exaggerating a drunken makeout session with George, who is now a successful and tenured professor with a lovely wife and daughters. Fast forward about 20 years to a few weeks ago. I was at a university giving a lecture to a room of 250 undergrad and grad students. In the end, I was mingling with the student afterwards, and I hear a voice say, "Hey, OP, long time no see," and I realize it's Jake, and I didn't change the expression on my face at all. I was completely shocked, and my instinct was to play dumb. So I said, "I'm sorry, help me out. Have we met at another workshop or lecture?" He looked incredulous and said, "It's me, Jake," and I said, "I can't place you, but I would love to figure it out." Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake. I guess I blocked you out," and said, "Well, lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach out and hug me. I was happy to leave it there, with the satisfaction of him seeing me as a guest lecturer in a science department of a major university when he was just in the audience. The department chair and faculty who had invited me to speak took me out to dinner, and while there, one of them said, "So you know Jake?" I said, "I did from over 20 years ago," being vague about how. She went on to tell me he had been there for an interview for a teaching position and had spent a few days there observing, and they were likely going to hire him. I couldn't control it. I scoffed. When they all looked at me, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just shocked he's teaching after what happened at University X." They said what happened, and I said he was sleeping with a 19-year-old student when he was 26, and he had to leave the program without a PhD because he couldn't afford to stay after losing his scholarship. The three people I was with all looked at each other like they knew they had a problem and said, "Wow, we'll have to look into that and change the subject." My old friend Mary, retired a year or two now but still friendly with her old collages, called me this weekend to say a friend at the university let her know someone had called doing a background check about Jake, and they pulled his file, which included being fired, leaving the program with a lower degree and the complaint letters from over 20 years ago about his conduct. Mary's name had been on it with her husband listed as the faculty advisor, so she thought she'd like to know. As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals. I guess his dad had paid for a decent lawyer to get the record expunged after the charges were reduced, and he paid the fine so it doesn't show up on a standard background check. I don't think he's going to get that job. So I will return to my life, content that the universe comes through sometimes, especially if you give it a little nudge now and then. The best revenge is when you don't have to do anything wrong. You just have to help direct knowledge to the right places. If there is anything I can impart to any young women and men reading this, as I shimmy happily into my now-size 10 pants, it's that if someone who is supposed to love you complains about your weight or looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, not yours, and maybe it's time to check out what they are doing behind your back or simply move on. Remember, though, it is their flaw, not yours. If Jake hadn't been a coward and tried to make me break up with him and just ended things with me in a mature way, I might not have found out about Meg and turned his own wickedness back on himself. My school had a tradition, and I'm not sure if it's odd or not, but each year we had kind of a mini valedictorian award, starting in middle school. I was in the gifted program, so several of us had 4.0s, so the award was given to whoever had the highest overall GPA on the 100-point scale. I've always been very competitive by nature, so I set my sights on winning this award in the 7th grade. However, there was a bit of competition. Let's call him Todd. Todd had really good grades as well, with the top spot usually bouncing back and forth between the two of us. It was so close that every single quiz, exam, and homework assignment had the potential to dethrone one of us while lifting the other. I had an average of 98, something as did he. Todd had a bit of an edge, however. See, Todd's mom was known for being a bully. She would yell, scream, berate, and openly mock any teacher who dared to give Todd a lower grade than me. But that isn't all. Todd's mom was also a teacher at our school. She would openly defy and berate her own colleagues, should they not provide whatever grade she wanted for Todd. Now, usually the school would avoid giving a child a class with their mother, but sometimes this was unavoidable. Naturally, we ended up in a class with his mother as the teacher. This was a world history class, one which required several papers, tests, etc. By the end of the year, Todd and I had been neck and neck in this class. But I noticed something. I consistently outperformed Todd by several points on any objective learning assessments, fill-in-the-blank tests, multiple choice, etc. However, somehow Todd consistently outperformed me on written, subjective learning assessments, papers, essays, etc. Being a young and ignorant kid, I just assumed he was better at writing, that is, until our final assignment rolled around. All our tests had been taken, all our quizzes and homework assignments graded, all our papers submitted and graded. The semester was functionally complete. I held a fraction of a point over Todd in the class, which put me overall ahead in the valedictorian race. But Mommy Dearest couldn't have that. So, with 3 days left of the year, she assigned a last-minute 2-page paper. Short and simple. I submitted mine and received a 95. Fair enough. I found out that Todd got a 100, just enough to put him ahead of me in the class and in the valedictorian race. I was frustrated, so I asked Todd to see his paper repeatedly, desperate to find ways to improve to better my chances the next year. He refused again and again. Then I remembered, when his mom handed the papers back to us, she never gave one to Todd. He hadn't done the paper, it was purely an assignment contrived to put him ahead. Now comes the revenge. Our school had just transferred to a paperless gradebook system the year before, so this was the second year on it. The principal was determined to make this cost efficient, so after the first trial year, he didn't even bother restocking the teachers with physical grade books. That way, he could add the amount saved from physical books to the total amount that the new paperless system was saving the school. Now, during this time, I also worked. I had a family member who owned a small local ISP, and I would help out at every opportunity. I love computers, and still do. Now, working with this family member equipped me with much more networking knowledge than other kids my age, and even most adults. I decided that with this power came great responsibility. I was going to right this grievous injustice. So, I started digging. I got on a school PC and started going through the network. Turns out, the school had wanted to save as much money as possible while going paperless. So, they didn't hire a professional technician, consultant, or anything. One of the dads just volunteered in exchange for a reduced tuition charge, private school. So, the system was just a nightmare. There was no dedicated network for sharing grades. There was no password protection on any files. There were no administrative restrictions on any files. Nothing. What he did was just share a single directory on the headmaster's computer. That directory held the entire gradebook for each and every class of each and every grade, kindergarten through 12th grade. I thought this was too good to be true. Surely there was a backup somewhere. So I went to the school's port switcher, which was just in an unlocked closet. I checked around, expecting to see a server or a set of drives set to automatically back up whatever is shared on the network. Now, I was in a rage. I had gone to the principal several times, pointing out that Todd's mom was abusing her position. She was bullying teachers to give her kid an edge. Her son would even brag about how he could get away with not doing homework in other classes because Mommy would make sure nothing came of it. But the principal had failed to act. He had declared that each teacher was sovereign in their classrooms. So long as nothing illegal happened, he would not intervene. He was a very unprincipled principal. So I made a decision to delete the nepotism happening. I couldn't just change my grades in her class. She monitored my average like a hawk. So I went nuclear. I went into that subdirectory and deleted every single file in it. But the principal had shared his whole user's desktop directory. So I emptied the recycling. I completely wiped every trace of grading software on that computer because the idiot didn't even put a password on the computer. So from the desktop subdirectory, I was able to access everything. This was in the very last couple of days of school. There were no hard copies, grade books, there were no backups. There was nothing remaining to even prove that the school year ever occurred. On the final day of school, we get called into an assembly. The principal is visibly disheveled, shaken, and upset. Not even angry, just broken. He announced that the entire year of grades were totally lost. The school didn't know what to do because there were no hard copies. They couldn't recover the data because they cheaped out and didn't purchase a backup system. All they could do was reinstall the software. But on grading software, if there is no grade to input, then what does it default to when showing the grades of the students? A 100%. Every single student in that school got valedictorian of their class that year, 100% all around. Heck, even a few kids got enough of a boost from that final year that they got to graduate on time instead of being held back. Next year, we had a new principal. I was held slightly suspect since everyone knew of my tech background, but nobody could prove anything. Even the PCs in the computer lab didn't have usernames or passwords, so there was no way to link me to anything. That following year, security cameras and passwords were put in the computer lab. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences, opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.